There you go. Thank you, Todd. Welcome everybody for another Tech Talk Tuesday. Today we're going to be talking about clustering in Nodegrid. So a little bit about what we're going to go over, what we're going to learn, benefits of clustering, the requirements and the different modes, an introduction to Nodegrid Manager. I'll discuss that once we get there. Enabling clustering, how to do it, what to do to make it actually work as a coordinator and peer, and then the licensing capabilities and licensing requirements, and then a quick overview or a demonstration of the overview topics. So without further ado, the benefits of clustering give you the ability to have centralized licensing of all Nodegrid devices. So that means that if you have a branch or have multiple branch locations with 100 branch locations, you don't have to buy a license pack for each individual location. You can buy one license pack for 400 access devices, some virtualization and monitoring, and have all of those distributed by the centralized licensing server, the cluster coordinator, as it would be. The ability to upgrade all Nodegrid devices from one location. So now if you say we had that same 100 branch locations, you don't have to log into each individual one, upload the code to it, and then so go to System Toolkit and select upgrade. We can do that automatically. And then the biggest one is the management of all Nodegrid devices in an organization or in an infrastructure, and all of their connected devices. So if it's a switch, router, servers, ILO, ESXi servers, whatever the case might be, we can manage all of those devices as well as the Nodegrid devices from one centralized location. The industry term, I'm not a big fan of it, but single pane of glass. The clustering is gives you the benefit of being able to have alerting from all devices into one central place that could be then put out to a SEM or syslog server, whatever the case might be. Clustering requirements. A cluster license is required for each Nodegrid device, not the devices that are managed by the Nodegrid devices, a little delineation there, because those will have licenses already intact for the hardware devices. So every Nodegrid device comes with the number of licenses for the serial ports and USB ports that are included in that device. And then we can also use the clustering for additional access licenses and those type of things. We also need to create a cluster coordinator. We'll show that. And then the enablement of each Nodegrid device on its local GUI or from its command line as a peer. And then we need some type of connectivity between Nodegrid devices. If that's an MPLS circuit, so all of the devices have connectivity to themselves or to each other. If that's an IPsec VPN between firewalls or whatever the case might be, or a local LAN or multiple VLANs, as long as they have a route to each other, I guess is the best way to put it, then they can cluster and become a and then they can become or they can join the cluster, I should say. So from that was a quick overview of the functionality. I'll jump into a demo and we'll go from there. So let me jump there. And let me jump to my web page. There we go. So clustering can be done in two ways. So if you have multiple Nodegrid devices, you can set one of those Nodegrid devices up as a cluster coordinator, and then have other devices within the organization, as we spoke of, as long as they have connectivity, we can set those up as peers to that device. What Nodegrid Manager does for us, Nodegrid Manager is basically was designed or is used as a way to manage multiple Nodegrid devices. So what this does is it would take the load off of a Nodegrid device, a NSCP, one of the serial devices, or a NSR, one of the router devices or gateway devices. It would take the load off and let them do just what they're supposed to do. And Nodegrid Manager provides a cost-effective way to manage the entire infrastructure. Nodegrid Manager is the same software, the same ISO that you use to upgrade Nodegrid services devices. So how it becomes a cost-effective way is all you need for it to be a coordinator is a single cluster license, and then cluster licenses, of course, for the other devices that are on the infrastructure that you want to be a member of the cluster. The other thing that Nodegrid Manager can do is, as long as there's IP connectivity, it can host IP, IMI devices, ILO devices, anything that's reachable via IP. It can also manage those. So Nodegrid Manager is an on-prem solution or a cloud solution in the customer's cloud environment. If it's AWS, Azure, Google, whatever the case might be, private cloud, whatever the case might be, that's where Nodegrid Manager runs. So as long as it has connectivity, it can manage any IP device, which in this case, you can see my Nodegrid Manager. I have some ESXi servers and an ILO that's actually that it's actually connecting to. So from there, in order to enable clustering, what we do is we go to the cluster tab, and then we select the settings tab. In this case, my Nodegrid Manager is set up as a coordinator. So you can see the cluster name. We can make that cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, and we can get into what that might mean down in a little bit. But then we set it as a type of coordinator. We allow enrollment, so devices can actually connect and become part of this specific cluster. We give it a pre-shared key. Cluster mode is either mesh, where every device is able to connect and manage every other device and their managed devices. This also means that once the mesh is enabled or created, we don't need the coordinator to be there in order for you to connect to other devices. Not saying that we want to leave the coordinator down for a long period of time, because there are check-ins and logging and such that go on, but say that you needed to upgrade the Nodegrid Manager to the most recent version of code. If you did that, you could still access all of the other devices from any other device, and I'll show what that means in just a minute. And star means that basically all devices that are in the infrastructure check in to the coordinator, and then we would need to log into the coordinator to actually manage the devices, the Nodegrid devices, and the devices that are managed by that Nodegrid services router. And then the polling rate, the default is 30 seconds. I have not seen a reason to change it. Maybe if you're using a cellular connectivity, then you may want to increase that, so you're just not using a significant amount of WAN bandwidth or gigabytes of traffic. And then clustering access gives us the ability to actually access the devices that the Nodegrid services router knows about. Services enable peer management. This is where, as I was talking about the upgrading of software, we can allow that or not allow it by enabling peer management. And there's another feature of centralized management, which I'll get into in just a few minutes. And then this is where we can also do the license pooling, as I talked about earlier. In this case, I'm going to make this a server. a licensed server. I'm going to give the renewal time of 1 day and the lease time of each license that is given out 7 days. So that means that the device could be up and licensed using that license for 7 days until it would need to renegotiate for another license. And the renew time is basically within 6 days. Then the Nodegrid services device would check in and say, "Hey, I need this license for another 7 days." So it would go there.
Hey, Mark, real quick, a question just came in on this topic, so I just wanted to ask it really quick.
Sure.
Can you assign a backup coordinator?
Yes. So what we have is, we have the ability to have under the clusters tab. This is where we can join. There's multiple ways, not to belabor the question, but there's multiple ways that this could be done, or why this could be done. Is one for a backup coordinator. The second one is for sites that, maybe it's a data center that has 10 or 15 Nodegrid service devices in it, and another data center that has 10 or 15 Nodegrid services devices in it. Instead of connecting all of those Nodegrid services devices across a WAN to the main data center, we could put a Nodegrid manager in each data center and then have the cluster from each join each other, and then they become basically, in ZPE terminology, a super cluster. So we could do that multiple times for X number of data center, X number of branch offices. But yes, that functionality is also available. So I'm going to jump over and show licensing. So in this case, I have in my Nodegrid services router, I have licenses for clustering, Docker containers, access, and monitoring, the 4 licenses that are available for Nodegrid services devices. So I have that many of them. I have 2 devices currently connected, and you can see that they have licensed a clustering license, so you don't have to enter anything in the Nodegrid services device. It will go out and say, once I become a member of the cluster, give me a cluster license. I have 10 access licenses. It distributes them in groups of 10. And then I don't have any virtualization enabled on these 2 devices, so none of those are checked out. So I just wanted to go quickly over that. So that's the setup of a coordinator. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Let me jump into, as you can see, my other device here. I'm going to move this out of the way. Maybe there we go. Move that down there. So this is one of my other Nodegrid services devices that's in my home lab. You can see I have several devices connected to it. So able to connect this to a cluster, we would go to the cluster tab. Right before I do that, I'm going to go to the system tab and show this has no licenses. You can see it has 25 licenses. Those are licenses that are on the device for hardware ports that are available to it, serial, USB, those kind of devices. So those are that's why there's access licenses there. But we can see we don't have any clustering licenses, nothing there. So in order to enable clustering, we can go to the cluster tab and go to settings, and then we can go to enable cluster. Automatic enrollment, let me just touch on that quickly. This is the ability to set up a Nodegrid services router to basically have a peer automatically connect and become a peer or join the cluster. In some organizations, if there's a lot of devices, this is a beneficial benefit of managing multiple devices. And once you do that, once you enable automatic management, we can go to the enrollment tab and actually put what subnets for security can actually connect to this, or what devices can actually connect to this. In our case, we're going to go in and join this as manually as a peer. The coordinator's address in my case is 2.65. Pre-shared key, since I've already set this up. And enable peer management is already selected. And then I'm going to make this a license pooling client. So once I do that, I'm going to go to save. And after a second, it will automatically go back and this will become grayed out. We can see now we have a peer and it's online. So this is still negotiating. Usually it takes 3 to 5 minutes for the device you're adding to the cluster to actually become a cluster member with all of its other devices. And I'll show that in just a minute. So let me back up here and we're going to go back to our Nodegrid manager. And I'm going to reload this page. And now you can see that I have full connectivity between all of the other devices on the Nodegrid services router. This might take a second for that one to come up. And now if we go to the access tab, this usually takes a second while we're waiting. I'm going to go in and show you, the IP functionality. So in this case, I have an ESXi server. I'm going to go web into it. It takes a minute because in all Nodegrid services devices, it's a proxy to HTTP connection. So the Nodegrid services router is going out and connecting to, in this case, my ESXi server. I'll log in with the proper username and password. So this could be across the country. And now I'm able to manage all of the ESXi servers. And with clustering, you can still do the group policies. So you can set up group policies for, say, a server administrator, a network administrator, and have those policies go down to all of the cluster members so that only somebody who is in the servers group gets access to the ESXi hosts and the ILOs or whatever the case, and only people in the, say, the security group get access to the firewall and the internet gateway, whatever the case might be. So let's close out of here. Of course, I move that to right in the way. And we'll go back and ensure that we now have the Minnesota gate. That's the one that we just added as a peer. And now we can go into, say, the web of my PDU. And in this case, I'm making a connection, Nodegrid Manager is making a connection and proxying that connection to, of course, something is logged into it, but probably not the best one to choose. Let's go to the serial gateway. This is my internet gateway that comes from my provider. So now you can see I'm in it. Control C, and we'll just do a show run. And now this is a device that is hosted by my Minnesota gate, but is being presented by Nodegrid Manager. So we can manage any device within the organization now from the single repository. One other feature, let's go 1 second, let's back up. So under management, we can go in and now we can see that this is the place where we can go in and say manage all of the software version codes of the devices on our infrastructure. The URL, so Nodegrid Manager can also be an HTTPS repository. So if we went to security and systems, I already have this set up. So this could be a file repository. So we could load the ISO into Nodegrid Manager and then use its IP address or DNS name within the organization. And then the path to the file on Nodegrid Manager. And that can be how we actually do the upgrades of devices, multiple devices, because the code for Nodegrid is the same. As long as it's, as long as you want to go to, in my case, 6.0.1 or whatever the case might be, we could have multiple versions of code residing on the Nodegrid if there's a if there would be a need for that also. Just wanted to make that point quick. And we're getting close on time, so I'm going to show one more thing. Yeah, under system, we can go to central management, and now here we can see that we have all of our devices. So what this means is central management gives us the ability to upload playbooks, Ansible playbooks. You could also upload other automation infrastructure and then call those from a quick Ansible to Chef or Puppet or whatever your automation scheme is. But what this gives us the ability to do is run scripts on the Nodegrid service devices, and via playbooks with variables, we can even run this on devices that are behind Nodegrid services devices. So a switch, a router, a firewall, we could do configuration changes, we can do initial setup, so we could even zero-touch provision with Nodegrid Manager and clustering. We can variabilize those. By default, there's an import settings from devices in here. We can upload others. There's a GitHub, a ZPE GitHub, where we can get those playbooks from, or you can write your own. And then we can variabilize those, so we can make it in the playbook. Hey, these variables need to be applied. If we add those, we can actually make those viable for one or multiple devices. So, and then we can either scope it to host, in my case, because I haven't discovered any devices behind there, or we can make it to other devices. And then we can get full logging of what happened when we ran that. So if you're trying to configure a VLAN on a Cisco switch, we can see, hey, the Ansible playbook ran, it did everything, it created, VLAN 100, and it put, port gigabit Ethernet 020304 into VLAN 100. So that functionality is there also. So with that, I'm gonna stop there, hand it back to Todd for questions. If you have questions about clustering or any other ZPE functionality, please reach out and let me know. More than happy to help out. This is what I do. This is my job. One other thing quick, if you have suggestions for what you would like to see in future tech talks, I would love to get your input on that. I don't want to just produce things or throw things out there that nobody's interested in. So if you have anything, reach out to me directly, reach out to Todd, and we can go from there. So
and we're actually going to send out, I'll talk about this in a second. We're going to send out an email and you can respond to that as well. But I do have 3 questions, Marc, that came in. This first one, I think you may have addressed, but I want to ask it just to make sure. Is there the capability to link multiple clusters together?
Yep, that was the functionality that we had the question on, and that is 100% available. We are working on that to even enhance it further, so that you could have multiple devices in mesh and in star mode. There's other functionalities that are being worked on also.
Okay, perfect. So, I kind of thought you answered it, but I just want to make sure. And then, are there certain ports required to be open in a firewall for joining a cluster via the WAN?
I knew somebody was going to ask that. Let me grab it here. Yeah. So if a firewall is on a LAN or on the LAN, TCP 9300 and TCP 9966 need to be open between the devices. So between the IP addresses of the devices, that would be the rule that you would need to allow both ways, so they can communicate both ways.
Okay, perfect. And then the last one I have here, and like I said, if anyone has any, throw them in real quick. Otherwise, this is the last one. It says, can system settings of cluster peers be changed from a coordinator?
So currently that is not a functionality of the coordinator, but here, let me reshare my screen quick. It's a great question. But what we can do is within the from the coordinator, we give the ability to get into the console or web of the individual device. So as you can see here, I can't go into the settings, the system settings, like I can my Nodegrid Manager, but I could web in to my device from one location and then bring up the system settings and make those configuration changes. Great question. Not sure if we're gonna change that, but that there it is. So now I'm actually in my Nodegrid Gate SR, and I could make configuration changes, manage devices changes to this specific device. So thanks for the questions.
Great, that's perfect. And I think that's the, excuse me, the last of the questions. So thank you, Marc, so much. And thanks to all of you for joining today's Tech Talk Tuesday. As I mentioned earlier, we will be doing these on the second Tuesday of each month, moving forward with a new topic. And the next demo will be on February 13th, our Valentine's Day Tech Talk Tuesday.
Oh, there we go.
And Marc will be discussing Nodegrid virtualization best practices. So for all of you that attended today that are still on here, actually that attended the entire thing, we'll be receiving an email with details about the $25 Amazon gift card. And like Marc mentioned, if you have any suggestions for future Tech Talk Tuesdays, please respond with that, let us know, and we'll be happy to get that taken care of and get that on a future cast. So thank you guys so much, and I hope the rest of you have a great rest of the day.